is that there's quite a bit of flexibility in the analysis. So if you have an attack that may be difficult to model in full, we can still model some properties of the attack, which I'll show later. But first, to quickly summarize the blockchain properties that we are, the blockchain definition that we are interested in our paper. Right, the naive blockchain is a chain of blocks. We all got that. There's transactions or something else in it, whatever you're storing on it. Hash the previous block, the pointer, what makes it a chain, and your proof of work. There is some peer-to-peer network, how you hear about blocks, how you tell other people about your blocks, and I'll go into how we model the network in our analysis. And then the mining role, which is what we consider to be the blockchain protocol. Like we saw before, for Bitcoin, that's Nakamoto's protocol, the longest chain rule. And this is what we're going to analyze for whether or not it satisfies consistency and under what regimes. But a blockchain isn't really necessarily a chain. It could be a tree. It could be any other sort of directed graph. So we're really going to call it a DAG of blocks. So we're interested in building a framework that is flexible to analyze any sort of protocol with any sort of shape. Some of the previous work in this area has looked at a formal framework for analyzing these blockchain protocols, which essentially summarize the properties that the blockchain protocols should satisfy into three variations of three properties, that being consistency, which we're interested in this paper, chain quality, and chain growth or liveness. Also work looking at different DAG-based protocols, and then attacks that choose one or more of these properties to attack. In this work, we use the model of past Seeman and Shelat, and we build upon their model for analyzing blockchains. So when we talk about a blockchain protocol, there's really two parts to it. There's the pi and the c. Pi is really the mining rule. It's the sort of meat of the blockchain protocol. And then C is, given a blockchain, if you want to extract whatever you want to extract from it, be it a linear sequence of transactions, C is going to be the protocol you run to extract that, which is sort of orthogonal to what we're interested in. And then these both have some security parameter K. So what does our model look like in our analysis? Well, we're interested in execution of the protocol. And in execution of the protocol, we have the environment. And the environment is going to be in charge of starting up players as either honest or corrupt. Honest players are running the protocol pi, and the adversary controls the corrupt players. And then we also model communication in the network by a router of sorts, which the adversary controls, giving the adversary full control of the network, but with some limits. So the adversary can, if you're a miner in this network, so every player is a miner, and if you find a block, you tell the router about it, and the router is in charge of delivering it to all other players. The adversary can reorder any honest message, and it can delay any honest message up to some maximum amount. And the adversary can withhold its own blocks for as long as it wants. So we talk about rounds in our model, and a round is going to be our smallest unit of time. So a round begins by the environment sending out messages to all the players. These are going to be the transactions or what you're going to include in your block. We just assume that the environment is going to give that to the miners. And then the adversary is going to get to inspect the states of all of the honest players and choose who they want to corrupt and who to uncorrupt, because we're going to give the adversary some maximum fraction of parties that can be corrupt at any given point. And once the adversary makes their choice, now everybody can try to mine. And we're modeling mining as a random oracle. So if you want to try to mine a block, you're going to query this oracle for this h of x, which is basically asking the oracle, hey, can I mine this block? And the oracle is going to give you back yes or no with some given probability. And then you can also call this verify function. So if you hear about a block, you can ask the oracle, hey, was this block mined correctly? And it will tell you yes or no. And it will only respond for blocks that have been mined correctly. So you can't use the verify function to try to mine. So at each round, each player gets one query to this oracle, so one chance to mine. And so if the adversary controls Q players, they're going to get Q queries to this random oracle, and as many queries as they want to the verify. So you can always verify as many blocks as you've heard about. And we're giving the adversary a little bit more power here and say that those queries can be sequential. So if in one of the queries the adversary finds a block, they don't have to keep working on the same block. They can move on to the other block, while the honest people are all working sort of in parallel. Again, so what we get from using this, from modeling mining with this random oracle, it gives us this property that mining is like flipping a coin. Each time you try, either you get it or you don't, and then you try again the next time. There is no better strategy to mining. There is no ASIC to mining in our model. And again, you can always verify blocks without giving up your chance to mine. So to summarize the adversarial model here, the adversary is going to have dynamic control of who to corrupt and who to uncorrupt, a decision they make at the beginning of each round. With full view of all the states, they're going to get Q sequential queries to this oracle, and then they'll be able to reorder and delay honest messages up to some amount, and also withhold their own blocks. So the parameters that we're working with here, with a round being our smallest unit of time, we have delta, which is the maximum amount of time the adversary can delay any message, so delta rounds. We have P, which is the probability that anybody mines in a given round, and that's with respect to delta and some parameter C. So C here is roughly the expected number of deltas before a block is found. And then rho is going to be the maximum fraction of parties that can be corrupt at any given point, and mu is the honest fraction. Like I said before, there's a few different properties that blockchain protocols should satisfy, and let's go over what consistency means, or the definition that we use. So given any two rounds, R and R prime, and some player that's honest at round R, some player I that's honest at round R, another player that's J that's honest at round R prime, if you take both their chains, cut off some constant number at the end, their chain should agree completely. So at any given point, any two chains should have some common prefix. And this also means that you should always have a common prefix with any future honest version of yourself. So again, the chains, we have the same chain, and we're going to keep having the same chain. Like I said before, our work mirrors the work done by Seeman and Shelat. And in their previous work, they looked at a way to bound consistency by looking at the relationship between how hard it is to find a block and how much adversary fraction can the protocol withstand and still satisfy consistency. So this is their results. Green line being the lower bound in consistency, and red line being an attack they show in the paper, which breaks that consistency. And so if you take the network delay to be about 10 seconds, C would be 60 for Bitcoin, so blocks about every 10 minutes. And you see here the consistency is as good as it gets. There's no room really for an attacker to do anything to break it in this model. But for something like Ethereum, where blocks are coming out, say, every 14, 15 seconds, their attack shows for 40% adversary a way to break consistency, but there is no lower bound on consistency. So there's no lower bound on guarantee consistency in this model. And so in our work, we find a better lower bound for it, so that for lower regimes, for Ethereum or other, say, altcoins that run Bitcoin's protocol but with faster times, or Nakamoto's protocol but with faster times, we're able to say something about the consistency. That like the adversary can't just do nothing and break consistency. There is some regime where consistency is satisfied. So in this paper, we present this Markov model-based approach to analyzing consistency. We analyze it for Bitcoin's protocol and two other protocols, and also a few different attacks on consistency. So for the rest of this talk, I'm going to go over how it is that we go about analyzing consistency, what we do in the paper, this attack on Nakamoto, and then briefly go over the two other protocols that we also analyze. Right, so how do blockchain protocols work? How is it that we are ever able to arrive at the same, of everybody having the same chain? Well, if you consider a period of time where nobody mines and we all have that the longest chain has block A as the last block, and then say Bob gets lucky, Bob finds a block that builds on top of A, Bob tells everybody about his block, and now we've all heard about it, and now if the time is more than the network delay, we've all heard about Bob's block, and now we all agree that Bob's block is the last block in the longest chain. That would be great. But say in the time that Bob is delivering his block, Alice goes out and finds her own block because she hasn't heard about Bob's block yet. Now we have a natural fork. We have two blocks at the same length in the chain competing for each other. So some people are going to hear about Bob's block first, and some people are going to hear about Alice's blocks first. So what keeps this from happening? What keeps us from having these natural forks ad nauseum? Well, there has to be some relationship between how long it takes for us all to hear about a block and how long it takes for the next block to be mined. So this is where we rely on something called a convergence opportunity, which is a 3-step event. This delta hit delta. So first we'll have delta rounds where nobody mines. So if nobody mines in delta rounds, by the end of it, we have all heard about all the blocks that exist, and we all agree on what is the length of the longest chain. There may be more than one out there, but we agree on the length at least. And then if one player gets lucky and finds a block, that block will be the last block in the longest chain. And so if that's followed by another delta round where nobody mines, then we all hear about that block. We all agree that that block is the longest, and now we are all in agreement from the block of step 2. With the caveat that all we can do is talk about what the honest people are doing. So if this is all happening with the honest people can agree if the adversary hasn't done anything. So in our analysis, in order to break consistency, the adversary, for any given period of time, the adversary needs to break all the convergence opportunities in that period of time. Otherwise, the honest people have at least one chance of converging on the same chain. So we are interested in counting what is the expected number of convergence opportunities we get in any period of time, and so how much work does the adversary have to do in that period of time. Right, so if we look at a period of time of T rounds, look at all of the blocks that the honest people mine, and look at the time between those blocks. And if that time is greater than the network delay, if it's greater than delta, then these are all convergence opportunities. These are all chances for honest people to agree on the same chain. What the adversary can do or needs to do to break this convergence opportunity is, or each of these convergence opportunities, is they need to insert one of their own blocks in this quiet period. So break the quiet period. So for each block that the honest person mines, there is a disagreeing block, another block at that same level, creating a fork for the honest people to disagree on. So in our analysis here, we want to count for any period of time the expected number of convergence opportunities that the honest people get, and compare that with the expected number of blocks the adversary could possibly mine. So the very minimum amount of work the adversary would have to do in order to break consistency. While keeping in mind that blocks may be found close together and far apart, so we need a way to be able to count specifically how long these quiet periods are, which is where Markov models are really great at this, counting really specific events. So now I'll get into how we do this. So we have a really simple Markov model. It's only 2 states. We have what we call the messy states, and this is the states where blocks are being found really close together. So we have no guarantee of convergence opportunity. The time between blocks are always less than delta. And then if we have delta periods where nobody mines, we have this chance of going into state 1, a chance of possibly having a convergence opportunity. If in state 1 we get an honest block plus a delta period of silence, those are convergence opportunities, and we're going to keep staying in state 1. Otherwise, if 2 blocks are found really close together, we're going to go back to our messy state. So in this model, this is what we're interested in counting. These are our convergence opportunities. Every time we cross that edge, the honest people have a chance of converging. So sort of the program to our analysis, for everything we want to analyze, we find the Markov model that captures the event we're interested in counting. In this case, convergence opportunities. We calculate the stationary distribution of the model, more details of that in the paper. And then we derive expectations for the events we're interested in counting, and then apply really strong concentration bounds around the expectation. So we get this new theorem for consistency, which basically says that the fraction of events that are convergence opportunities is greater than the fraction of events that are adversarially mined blocks. So in other words, if you have T rounds, the number of blocks that the adversary needs to break consistency is going to be greater than the number of blocks the adversary could possibly mine. So the adversary can't do the minimum amount of work to break consistency. So now I want to go over an attack on consistency for Nakamoto's protocol. And this is an attack that Seeman and Shelat presents in their paper, and it's a very simple attack. All the adversary does is delay all honest blocks the maximum amount while secretly mining their own very efficient chain. So the goal here is to thwart the growth of the honest chain while mining a really efficient secret chain. And so this is the attack that, like I mentioned, Seeman and Shelat look at. And this line says that what's the adversarial fraction needed for this attack to succeed indefinitely? So for Bitcoin, right, I mentioned before, it's basically not going to do much. But what we're interested in is not the adversarial power needed for the attack to succeed indefinitely, but what's the probability that maybe an adversary with less power can make the attack last for 5 blocks, 10 blocks, enough blocks that there is some chance of your transaction being reverted. And so we calculate that with a slightly more complicated infinite Markov model. And this model is basically keeping track of what is the expected size of the honest chain and what's the expected size of the adversary's chain with what probability. So we can use this model to calculate the probability that the attack lasts for some L blocks. So for here, given 3 different options for C and a 49% adversary, there's a pretty significant probability that the attack is going to last for at least a while. And we can look at for different adversarial percentages. But just to give an example here, with a 25% adversary and for, say, Bitcoin's parameters, there is more than a 1% chance that this attack is going to last for at least 9 blocks. So if you make a really high value transaction, you only wait 8 blocks before you give up the goods, then there's at least a 1% probability that an attacker could be running this attack and revert your transaction. So it's a really good model to understand your risk when it comes to transaction for this attack in this model. And now to quickly go over 2 other protocols that we analyze. You can see it in more detail in the paper. There is click chain, where instead of having one chain, you have multiple chains that interconnect. So if you are block I in one of these chains, you will not only point to the block I-1 in your chain, but you'll point to all block I-1s in every other chain. So sort of a click of pointers there. And we actually find that surprisingly, no matter how many chains you add, you keep the same lower bound on consistency as Nakamoto's protocol, as the one chain version. So you can't just add chains and have more transactions without losing something when it comes to consistency. And we also analyzed that delay attack for this. We get a different model for however many chains you have, and we stop at 3 chains because we find that surprisingly, the more chains you add, the more resilient the model is to this attack. Because the whole point of the attack is for the adversary to make honest people waste work. Well, if the honest people have already divided up their work, it's harder to make honest people waste work. So at 3 chain, the attack basically doesn't work anymore. We also look at Ghost and find that surprisingly, Ghost also has the same consistency lower bound as the one-chain version of Nakamoto's protocol. We look at a different attack, the balancing attack. It's sort of a complicated attack to model. This is a snapshot of it. It's really this 3 layers of infinite chains. But we can still do a random walk on this model, and like we did for Nakamoto's protocol, calculate the probability that the attack lasts for some given number of blocks. So sort of some estimation and confirmation time. And you can check out the paper for the analysis on this attack. But a quick summary. So we present this Markov model-based approach that is really flexible in allowing us to look at a few different things when it comes to the consistency property of blockchain protocols. We were able to reduce 3 different blockchain protocols to the same consistency lower bound using the same analysis, and also be able to reason about the success of different attacks. And our future work is to look at different models and different attacks and how we can further use this model. Right. Thank you. Take questions.
Thank you. It's very useful work, I think. I wanted to ask you whether you think this technique can be extended to analyze game theoretic aspects of the blockchain, namely fairness of the mining process.
Yeah, so you can use it to for, say, maybe attacks on chain quality. If the adversary can get more blocks than its fraction of power, that has been used to analyze that attack. I think anything where you can have the sort of independent probability of what the adversary is doing, a Markov model is really great for.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead.
So you mentioned that the adversary should control a subset of the players in order to produce this attack. Can you comment on how likely is for an attacker to perform this in the blockchain system that we have now, like Ethereum? How many of the miners should control, like in the order of millions?
I don't know. I don't know if there even are millions of miners in Ethereum. I think there's like 20,000 nodes or something at most. I think it's hard to, I don't know the exact numbers for Ethereum, but this is sort of like in the worst case adversary, like what can we say about these protocols? So if you do want to consider like worst case, what could happen with a real system where, billions of dollars are invested, is more of the approach here.
So do you think that the attacks are practical in the sense that you could invest enough to combine the miners to attack?
I think that these are worst case adversary, like I said, but I think it's not out of the realm of possibility that somebody with a lot of computational power and a lot of interest in taking down, maybe not Bitcoin because it's a really big network, or Ethereum, but maybe one of the smaller altcoins that require less power to take down and have less power in it. I think they are feasible.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Do you think the lower bound can be improved, or?
I think it can. I think we do make some leeways in our analysis that could leave room for improvement in it.
So would you say that maybe the rate of block creation in Ethereum should be slowed down, should accumulate harder in order to, or do you think that the amount of computational power to mount the attack is still out of question?
So right now, there's consistency at about 33% adversary, and I think that's reasonable for Ethereum. Yeah, but not to say that Ethereum is safe against a 50% adversary. I think, but reasonable adversary. Yeah.
Let's thank the speaker again.
Thank you.